So Robert Helenius had made it clear that there was a massive announcement coming today, and a lot of people on Twitter were speculating who his next fight would be. He steps aside from fighting Derek Chisora for the European belt, and people presumed there'd be a much bigger fight for him on the horizon. There were talks of Helenius versus Charles Martin, Helenius versus Anthony Joshua, Helenius versus Joseph Parker. To be honest, I was somewhat overwhelmed when the opponent was announced as Johann de Par. Johann de Par, who, let's be honest, is best known for going a few rounds with Deontay Wilder. Robert Helenius, he's one of these guys. He was a seriously hyped prospect 3 or 4 years ago. And he's kind of disappeared off the scene. I know he's had promotional problems, I know he's had injury problems, but you kind of think it's about time for this guy to have had a decent fight. I mean, he was supposed to fight Erkan Tepe. That didn't happen because Tepe got banned. Then he was supposed to fight Derek Chisora. And he stepped aside from Chisora to fight Johann de Par. It just seems like a very odd move to me. Johann de Par is not a bad fighter. He performed with credit against Deontay Wilder. He marked Deontay Wilder up pretty badly with his jab and, showed tremendous heart and tremendous chin to stay in that fight. But let's be honest, Johann de Par is not one of the names on people's lips when you're talking major heavyweight announcements. I'd view Johann de Par as more someone I'd be wanting to test my prospects against. I'd be more wanting to put like a Joseph Parker and Anthony Joshua in with the de Par, rather than putting him in with an established contender like Robert Helenius. I understand the fight is for the WBC silver belt, and I know that Helenius obviously will probably be looking to steer himself in the direction of a world title, but is the WBC silver belt really worth more than the European title? I don't know. I mean, one thing that was interesting is Helenius is a pretty big draw in Finland. I think for his fight with Franz Rill, and let's be honest, Franz Rill is an even worse opponent perhaps than Johann de Par. It was interesting to read that in his home country of Finland, he sold 60,000 pay-per-views and 11,000 tickets. Now, I appreciate that with our British and American mentalities, we may laugh at 60,000 pay-per-views. But let's do the maths on this. I don't know how much a pay-per-view costs in Finland. But let's say Helenius sold 11,000 tickets at £40 a go. That's best part of £500,000, isn't it? And let's say he sold 60,000 pay-per-views at £15 a go. That's 900,000. So the total purse value for Robert Helenius, Franz Rill, was likely over £1 million. And that's big money for a fight like that. Because if you're Robert Helenius, you're probably not having to pay huge amounts of money for an undercard. You're probably not having to pay huge amounts of money to get Franz Rill over to fight you. So what I'm getting at is, you do get these kind of quirky locations like Finland where a homegrown fighter can become somewhat of a pay-per-view star. Joseph Parker's had reasonable success becoming a pay-per-view star in New Zealand. I remember reading about Mikhail Kessler being quite a big pay-per-view star in Denmark. So Robert Helenius is possibly looking to milk that model. And if he did 60,000 against Franz Rill, he might want to be pushing more towards the 100,000 with Johann de Par. So I can understand, whilst it's not a glamorous fight, it may be a fight that performs adequately in Finland. But I don't really see it as being one that's going to help Helenius progress to the position he needs to be at. I pick Helenius to win this fight. He's certainly got to show up in shape, because you've got to anticipate de Par is a guy who's going to hang round. If he went 11 rounds with Deontay Wilder, there is the potential de Par could go the distance here. But I think Helenius is likely going to have too much for him. I think for Robert Helenius, he's really got to get himself to a big fight soon. There's a lot of these European heavyweights at present: Pulev, Povetkin, Mariusz Wok, Helenius, and you think the way to sort of get himself in that mix and start moving himself towards world titles would be to take on a bigger fight. But he hasn't done that, and I think that's disappointing. So let's see where he goes from here. I mean, Johann de Par is not a bad fighter, and Helenius, to me, he always looks beatable. I remember, he's a tall guy, he seems to have a good chin, he seems to carry good power, he fights classically, he's got the 1-2, but he's a bit slow-paced, and whilst he carries big power and a big early start in the first few rounds, he seems to just trudge around the ring throwing jabs for the rest of the rounds. And his limitations were exposed by Derek Chisora. I thought he struggled at times with Michael Sprott in their fight that went 10 rounds. So Helenius could get upset at some point. I don't think Johan the Par's going to be the person to upset him. I don't think the Par's got great power, and I think Helenius may be able to outsize him and outstrength him. But you never know, it could develop into an interesting scrap. Elsewhere, Luis Ortiz will be fighting Tony Thompson after Dimitrenko pulled out for his fight against Luis Ortiz. Now, Tony Thompson is saying that it's great, he's going to have the opportunity to fight for a world championship. I'm not sure I buy into that. I know Luis Ortiz is the WBA interim champion, I think. But, yeah, he's not. Luis Ortiz isn't a world champion. I mean, come on. So, yeah, credit to Tony Thompson. I mean, Tony Thompson is the kind of guy who can expose highly touted prospects. I'm not saying he's going to expose Luis Ortiz. I'm not picking Tony Thompson at this stage. But, Tony Thompson exposed Solis twice. He exposed David Price twice. And, it takes a real good fighter to beat Tony Thompson. Carlos Takam beat him. Kubrat Pulev laboured to a victory over him, I thought. Malik Scott was essentially able to outmove him and outjab him. Tony Thompson looked a bit old then. But Thompson's an interesting character, and it's a good fight to take for Ortiz. I mean, Thompson's obviously a southpaw, very experienced, very awkward, very clever in the ring. Likes to fight. Sometimes he can control the pace. That was one of the things Carlos Takam did well in his fight against Thompson. Is Takam kind of took away Thompson's reins and forced the pace on Thompson. But you've got to be careful, because if you allow Tony Thompson to dictate the pace and slow things down and control things, he can become exceptionally awkward. He's got a reasonable level of durability about him, Thompson, as well. Obviously he performed with some credit against Vladimir Klitschko twice at the highest level. Went the distance against Solis once and then beat Solis and beat David Price. These guys are known as very big punchers. So, Thompson, he's not got the best chin in the world. He can be hurt. We see David Price dropped him, Vladimir dropped him, stopped him. Thompson can be hurt, and Luis Ortiz can stop him. But if Luis Ortiz has any stamina problems, if Thompson is able to survive the initial burst of the fight, if Thompson can get through the first 2-3 rounds, potentially it develops into a more interesting scrap, because Luis Ortiz is an older guy. He's very heavy. He's not got professional experience of going that many rounds, and potentially Tony Thompson can cause him a few issues in the fight if it goes past a few. Tony Thompson, I must say, did look old against Malik Scott, and Luis Ortiz is a different threat to Malik Scott. He's not going to necessarily out-jab you and outrun you for 12 rounds, but he may bulldoze straight through you. And Luis Ortiz has an explosive first round. He's like an Anthony Joshua in that sense. The first round from Luis Ortiz can be a devastating first round. If you look at the way he got rid of Latif Coyote in the first round, even if he wasn't steroids. You look at how he fought against Bryant Jennings in the first round. It's actually testament to a fighter if they can survive that first round. So, Tony Thompson, if he's really at the end of his career, if he's just taking this as one last payday, and let's be honest, Ortiz is associated with Golden Boy. Thompson's coming in at late notice. They've struggled to get opponents. Thompson will be getting paid fairly well for this. If Tony Thompson's showing up for one last payday in his mid-40s, Ortiz could just bulldoze through him in the first round. But what becomes interesting is if Thompson survives the first 3 or 4 rounds, gets his jab going, and Ortiz starts to gas, which I think is very possible, because Ortiz throws a lot of big powers shots. He's very old, very heavy, and he overly commits in fights. Thompson's durable. He's gone the distance many times in fights, and could potentially be an interesting scrap. Most likely though, I've got to say that I think this is. Thompson looked like a beaten man against Malik Scott to me. Thompson, to me, should have beaten Malik Scott with ease, but was simply too old and outgunned by a younger guy. And I think he's a smart guy. He probably knows that. And he's looking for one last payday. Thompson's a very brave man. He's been in with Vlad twice, David Price, Solis, as I say, Pulev, Takam. He's not going to be scared of going in with Luis Ortiz. Ortiz has this big reputation, but Thompson's been hit hard. He's been stopped in fights. He's been in tough fights. He's not going to be scared. It could develop into an interesting test for Luis Ortiz. Thompson has the potential to make Luis Ortiz look very good. Thompson also has the potential to make Luis Ortiz very bad. It depends how motivated he is and what kind of Thompson turns up. Ortiz should win the fight, barring running out of stamina and getting worn down late. Let me know your thoughts on this. Give me your thoughts on the Helenius Duhaupas news. Give me your thoughts on the Ortiz-Thompson news. Let me know your predictions. Who are you picking? I'm siding to Helenius points, Ortiz KO. Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this, click the thumbs up button. I'd appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button so you can follow the channel. Thanks for watching.